Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. I'd like to ask you all that if you enjoy this content and you enjoy my narrations, please post a comment or hit the like button. If you want to hear more of my content, please feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell icon for notifications for when I drop videos in the future. And now, without further ado, let's get into the stories for this evening. The Woman in the White Dress. This happened just yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm not quite sure what to think of it because it was just so bizarre and unbelievable. I might have just been sleep deprived. So last night at maybe 11 p.m., I was walking around my block. My town is relatively safe, so I didn't feel in danger. Plus, it was a pretty night. I'd been walking for around 5 minutes when a pale woman with blonde hair and a white dress caught my eye from across the street. She was about my height and looked to be around my age. I didn't actually pay attention to her after I first noticed her. While I circled the block again, she was on the same street, a couple of feet in front of me. She was standing on the curb, staring at the cars passing by. It was a main road, so even that late, people were still driving on it. I said hello to her, and she turned her gaze to me. I couldn't see her face super well, but from what I think I saw, she had no pupils or color in her eyes. She just stared at me. After a while, I asked if she was okay. She didn't respond again and simply pointed at the road. I was really confused and didn't understand. Right as a red car started coming down the road, she stepped onto it. The car slammed into her and it was a bloody mess. The driver immediately stopped and jumped out. It was a man in his mid-20s. We both spoke about it, freaking out. He called the police and I went around the car to see the state of the girl. Once I circled around the car, she was gone. Not gone as in dead, gone as in she just wasn't there. The blood on the road was gone too, but not gone from his car. After the police arrived, they concluded that it was some big hoax of a kid who didn't know what they were talking about and some guy who went along with it. The blood on the truck was brought to investigation, only to be found as paint. Nothing else was put up about it. I'm not sure if what happened was real. It felt so real. But I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't know what it was, if it was just a dream or if it was real. I remember it like it was. I feel like I can't leave the house now. I don't understand anything now. I kind of feel like I'm going crazy. Has anyone else experienced something like this? My dad's mystery and my dad's creepy coworker. I've had a lot of weird, unusual, or just downright creepy instances happen in my everyday life. For as long as I can remember, it's not just me either. Several members of my family have shared some scary stories with one another down the years. What I'm about to tell you is a completely unexplained mystery that happened to my dad in 1980 when he was 18, and it involves a night out with his best friend and their girlfriends at the time, whose relationships didn't last long. It may not seem relevant, but the events in this story are one of the reasons for that. My dad grew up in Manchester, England in the 70s. As my dad was looking for work and balancing university, he had a night out every Friday and Saturday night, usually with his friend, who I'll call Wayne for privacy reasons. Despite my dad's thirst for alcohol, he never used drugs or smoked weed even, though his friends did. Wayne, my dad, and their girlfriends at the time arrived at a nightclub in Manchester one Friday night. None of the four were intoxicated, yet, so the eagerness to get hammered kicked in. My dad bought the round of drinks, but before he could take a sip, he was bursting to use the restroom. So he handed over the drinks to his friend and girlfriends while he went to use the John. The club was not busy yet, as it was only 11 p.m., so the line for the toilet was very short. Security guards kept an eye on drug users and people falling asleep, or being simply too drunk or wanting to fight in the bathroom. My dad did his business within a couple of minutes, and after washing his hands, opened the door back to the dance floor to a pit in his stomach. The last song of the night was playing. This song played every night the club was open to signal it was last call. My dad couldn't piece together what was going on. How could the last song of the night be playing? He asked the bartender for the time, and the bartender's watch was 5 minutes to 2. Stunned, my dad couldn't understand how a bathroom break for a couple of minutes went by over 4 hours. He was slapped hard in the face by his then girlfriend, accusing him of leaving the club to be with another girl. Even my dad's friend Wayne had a smirk on his face, eagerly awaiting to hear who the girl was. My dad was not amused, and he was extremely angry, not understanding what was going on. Was the whole club playing a joke on him? Did he fall asleep in the club? Wait, security would have thrown him out if he was asleep. He couldn't process what was going on. He went home and took 3 shots of vodka to calm down. To this day, my dad cannot figure out what happened that night, and 39 years later, he still swears to this day he was sober that night at the club. Months after that night, he met my mom in the same nightclub. His first time back. Questions will surround that night at the club seemingly forever. Was my dad abducted by aliens? Was he thrown into another dimension? Or did someone drug him and then bring him back to the club? We'll probably never know what really happened. But if something did, I'm glad my dad doesn't remember it. The cottage in the woods. Now, this isn't a scary story, but more of a creepy one. My friend's dad's family used to live in the woods near Eureka Springs, Arkansas. My friend's uncle was the oldest of the 3 kids and was allowed to explore the woods on his own, even though he was only about 9. One day he came across a little cottage nestled in the woods. He knocked on the door and was greeted by 2 old ladies. He promptly asked for some water, as he'd been exploring for hours. The ladies invited him in and gave him milk and cookies and sat down and talked with him while he pet their white cat. They talked for a while, and they eventually invited him to stay for dinner and spend the night. Because it was getting dark, he was a ways from home. His parents were pretty used to him being in the woods for nights without coming back, so he accepted without question. He spent the night without incident and returned home the next morning. He visited many more times over the next year, and one day they told him to bring his parents and brothers the next time he came. So, the next week, the whole family embarked on the long trek to the cottage. When they arrived, however, they found the remains of a small cottage that appeared to have been abandoned for years. Everyone was very confused as they all trusted that my friend's uncle had visited the women many times. They had absolutely no idea what had happened, or if my friend's uncle had actually been visiting anybody. To make things even weirder, as they were leaving, an old, skinny, white cat ran past them, darting into the trees, leaving them in utter shock. Was he holding a knife? This story took place my sophomore year of high school. I was 15 years old, a girl, young for my grade. It was a Wednesday in the winter. I joined the honor society at my school. Besides meeting and talking about how to help my community, we also had to meet at 7:20 a.m., which was 25 minutes before school. Since I wasn't a morning person, missing more time to sleep was always frustrating. That's why I was always late, which on this day I was running late. Being 15, I couldn't drive myself to school, so I had to have my grandma, who lived with my mother and I, take me to school, since at the time my mother would be in the bathroom putting on makeup before work. My grandma opened the garage with a button on the wall. Both my grandma and I got into her car, which was parked in the garage, of course. Once closing the door, she would pull out into the driveway. Now, she looked back towards the front windshield to pull out to the right towards the street to our cul-de-sac, and I screamed to stop, and she quickly jammed on the brakes. There was a man, tall, about 6 feet, dirty blonde-looking hair, wearing all black. He was only illuminated by the headlights since the winter morning it was pitch black, and today it was raining. I noticed something in his hand. Being the observant person I was, I thought I saw a black handle. The man didn't look at us, explain himself, or wave a hand to say sorry. He just stopped in front of the lights for about 3 seconds before continuing to walk through our yard towards our neighbor's house. We watched him disappear in the dark. I live in a neighborhood where we all know each other and watch out for each other. We all own about 1 acre of yard. Recently, my neighbors have been having work done around their houses, with taking down some trees and fixing up their homes. So my grandma, with her heart of gold, continued driving as we discussed what just happened. She assumed he was just a worker. I knew he wasn't. I told her I thought he had a knife, and she brushed it off, saying maybe it was a worker holding a dustpan or a shovel. He could have just been using our yard as a shortcut. But no, something told me I had to warn my mother. So I began trying to text my mom, but no texts were sending. Nothing was going through. I texted, "Lock the door," but when it went through, she didn't understand and questioned me, saying, "What? Why?" At this point, I called her, quickly explaining the situation and yelling at her to bolt lock the door. She did, and Not a second later, he opened our screen door and tried to open our door's handle. When it didn't work, he tried to kick the door down. My mother then called the police. I don't know how quickly the police arrived, but we live in a small town, so I assume the response time was fast. When the police arrived, she told them what happened and they wrote up a report. Later that morning, the man was found a couple roads down. He tried to get into some other houses too when he ended up getting into a house and a man chased him out with a shotgun. He was caught and arrested. He was found with a large butcher's knife. Although this isn't an extreme story, it always holds a lot of what-ifs. What if I hadn't been late? What if I hadn't got a hold of my mom? And the biggest one of all, what if I wasn't late and my grandma would have asked him if he needed help? I'm now a junior in high school and it's been about a year, but the effects of this encounter still haunt me. I'm afraid to be alone. I will double check or even triple check locks and listen intently to the sounds of my house when trying to go to sleep. If I hear something, I'll try to go check it out. He's made me paranoid, but I guess my fears are rational. Who expects their own home to be the site of a creepy encounter? The creepy trail guy. I'm a 20-year-old female and I live in Michigan. I was 16 years old when these events happened. I'm a huge athletic nerd, and I go hiking every day unless I feel lazy. I picked the wrong day to go one day, and I met and experienced something I will not want to experience again. I drove to the hiking trail I go to just about every time I go hiking. And this day I saw a creepy guy who looked like he would be in his 30s. But me, being as stubborn and hard-headed as I was back then, I ignored my gut and went and started jogging the trail. I took a short glance at him and started going onto the trail. I got 2, maybe 300 yards away from the entrance and took a short break, until I heard a scream from what sounded like a man and looked down the path, which made my heart drop. I saw the guy running straight toward me. As my adrenaline rushed into me, I started to run as fast as I could. This guy was running so fast, he was catching up with me, and I was a really fast runner. This guy ran like he'd taken 2 shots of steroids. As I started to cry and panic, I took a sharp turn into the woods and started to run back to the parking area. I kept hearing his footsteps not too far behind me once again. As I kept running, the footsteps started to go slower as I was getting closer and closer to the parking lot. At last, I made it to the parking lot and cried tears of joy as I took out my cell phone and called the cops. Not long after they arrived and searched and found the man. He was a homeless 37-year-old guy, and they said they found a butcher knife in one of his coat pockets. To this day, I am glad I did ROTC throughout high school, or else he would have had an energy advantage against me. The creepy maniac homeless guy. Let's not ever meet again. I was followed. To start off with some background, I'm a female, and at the time this happened, I was about 12 years old. I lived in a quiet suburb in South Carolina at the time, and used to spend hours just walking my dog around the neighborhood because there wasn't much else to do. At the time, we had a 70-pound basset hound named Rufus, who looked kinda like a sawed-off Saint Bernard. So I was walking him around late in the afternoon in the fall, and it started to get dark. I was on the other end of the neighborhood from my house when I first saw a beat-up, rusty red pickup truck just kind of driving around. I didn't think a whole lot about it because it's the South, so pickup trucks are all over the place around here and don't automatically mean anything. But as I was walking home, I saw the truck cross a street I was going past and then come back out the other end further down and go back the way I'd come from. To give you an idea of the neighborhood, it wasn't set up like regular blocks, more like a main road, and then a bunch of roads that all looped around and came back to the main one. At first, I just figured the guy was lost or something and didn't think much about it. But as I was getting closer to my house and it was getting darker, I saw the truck again. Another thing about my neighborhood was, even though there were a lot of houses, everybody pretty much kept to themselves in their own house for the most part. So there wasn't really anyone outside this time of night, even though it was still fairly early. So I come out of the neighborhood onto the road to my house, and the truck is there again. This time just parked on the side of the road, facing the road I came out of. I turned onto the road to my house and it started moving, driving slowly behind me with the lights out. Now, if you know anything about basset hounds, they're not the most threatening kind of dogs. They're short and stubby, kind of like big Dachshunds, with these giant ears and goofy faces. So even though Rufus was a big dog, he wasn't exactly the greatest guard dog. They also don't walk very fast and tend to trip over their ears when they run, so I was stuck with him setting the pace. And with him weighing almost as much as I did, it's not like I could reach down and pick him up and try to run or anything. So here I am, walking down the dark road in a quiet neighborhood with my slow-ass dog and this creepy-ass truck behind me. I knew I couldn't really run from it, and doubted that anyone would hear if I tried to scream or something if someone came after me. So finally I came up with a plan, even if it was probably a stupid one. When I got to one of the handful of street lights on the street, I stopped and turned around and just stared the truck down. The truck stopped moving and just kind of sat there, about 30 feet away from me, like it was trying to look like it was parked or something. I stood there and stared at that truck for what felt like forever, but was probably around 2 or 3 minutes. Finally, after a while, the truck started moving again, turned on its lights and turned off down another road. And I booked it into somebody's backyard and took the backyards the rest of the way home. I never told my mom about the creepy truck, because I knew she'd freak out and probably wouldn't let me take the dog out alone anymore.